Okay, this ought to be a very interesting, exciting panel. I guess it was really a mid-year before last that many of us were, I think, sort of stunned with the suddenness with which RPR became a vendor, and their first vendor project that they took on was implementing a new system called Upstream. And really since that time, as we've really tried to kind of digest and work through that issue, there have been, in terms of how to support Upstream and the broker motivations behind it, I think we've really been trying to, just sort of process, what is the main purpose behind that and how it's going to work out. But again, there are other people that are working on these same problems about, third-party ad edit and having distributed ad edit. And to that end, we're going to go ahead and have that discussion here. I'd like to welcome Errol Samuelson, who's working with Bridge Interactive, now part of the Zillow Group. Joe Kazoon with Instanet Solutions, with their transaction desk product. Alex Lang with Upstream, and then Mike Werzer with FBS, again, an MLS vendor. So again, this is our esteemed panel, and we're going to go ahead and really just try to really understand better. I mean, I think all of us as MLSs are trying to work through, I guess, what is a growing recognition that we are going to need to support multiple providers of ad edit solutions and try to figure out how to integrate those into the MLS. And it's going to be, I think, technically a real challenge, but also there are other non-technical issues as well. And I think in the rush to work on implementation and just sort of the nuts and bolts of the programming, there really, I think, is a chance to kind of back up a little bit and really try to just ask a real basic question about kind of, who cares? I mean, what problem are we really trying to solve, and who are we solving that problem for? Is this an agent, broker, or franchise issue? And so, really, I think just working down the line here, let's go ahead and start with that basic question, sort of who cares and what problem are we solving?
Sure, okay. We're trying to solve a class of problems. So the first challenge we're focused on is the issue of an agent entering a listing into multiple MLSs. So we'd like to solve the problem where you enter it once and you can post that listing to multiple MLSs. The second challenge we're addressing is when you wish to have high resolution photos or more photos than the MLS will support, giving the brokerage the ability to enter unlimited photos, unlimited resolution, post the photos in the right resolution to the MLS, but then archive the additional photos so that the broker can use them in things like brochures or on their website or elsewhere. The third problem that we're addressing is a number of brokerages have fields that they wish to capture, might be related to how the listing is going to be marketed or maybe for their accounting system, but additional fields that the MLS does not capture today. And so we want the agent to be able to use a single interface, enter all the MLS fields, but then also add the custom fields that the brokerage or the franchisor is looking to capture. And then the final problem we're solving is, now that we've got all this information into the multiple listing service, how do you help a brokerage get that information out in a very simple way? And in fact, if they're a larger brokerage that spans maybe several MLSs or even several states, being able to allow that brokerage to get the information out from multiple MLSs in a single format, in a single interface. So that's the classes of problems we're addressing, and in a few minutes, if we have a chance, I'd love to tell you about how we actually have a working system that solves every one of those problems in the first market where we've installed it, which is in Atlanta.
Joe, transaction desk.
Yeah, so let me tell you about our workflow, and I think that'll help you understand what issue we're trying to solve. And what we're trying to solve is redundant data entry by agents and brokers primarily. Our solution, we originally started as a forms company, so that's where we came from. And what we do is we allow an agent to enter the listing into the listing input sheet or listing profile form, whatever you call it in your market, and they can then upload it into the MLS to create a listing, or they can save it and have the brokerage staff review it and upload that data into the MLS so there's no redundant entry. You can also use that form or any other form to send that data to a brokerage system, which we do as well. And I just want to make sure the point that this seems to be a hot topic these days, third-party ad or third-party edit listings. We've been doing this for 10 years, and we have, I think when Houston goes live with this feature in a few weeks, we'll have over 300,000 agents able to add listings into an MLS from our third-party system. So it's not a new thing. So.
Well, I mean, thank you, Errol, for such an eloquent listing of the benefits that we're all trying to solve, the features that we're trying to hit. It's just, and upstream is exactly the same thing. I mean, we're trying to solve the same problems of multiple MLSs, especially for large brokerages who are trying to consolidate some of the workflow. And they'll literally have, like a listing coordinator, have 4 separate screens up at the same time. And it's kind of insane. Trying to align to standards and just have the same way of entering the information, the same way to store it, the same, be able to distribute it to everybody. Unlimited photos, unlimited video, same issues. I think it's the same issues all around that we're all trying to solve. I think to answer part of your question, I think primarily it isn't, even though many of the agents are entering, I think fundamentally it's a broker problem, right? The brokers are trying to find these efficiencies. They're trying to solve these problems across the board. I'm not sure how much of it's a franchise issue, but it's definitely, but even franchise systems are trying to find ways to integrate sort of the add edit feature into their ecosystems, right? So that their agents don't actually leave their intranet, if you will, or their common tools, and they'll be able to do it from there.
Mike?
Yeah, I think a good description of it generally. I think a power of a great API that allows for third-party entry will create innovation. You know, things we haven't even dreamt of before about how to make listing entry become faster and easier for everybody. So I think there are lots of use cases that have been articulated here, but it's the ones that we haven't thought of that are probably the most important looking ahead in the next 10 or 15 years. Yeah.
Well, just thinking for a moment about the near-term future, I mean, the thing that we really noticed in terms of HAR with our mobile system, and we actually were able to, call the legacy MLS, into the mobile app, and so we had a full add edit capability there, in the mobile app. But really, what we found is that the agents were, for the most part, using that system to do partial edits. That they weren't actually trying to do full-blown listing creation, that it was more a matter of wanting to change a status, adjust a price, tweak a remark, upload a couple of pictures, maybe resequence pictures. And so when you really think about sort of the, full listing creation, obviously has, a lot of complex moving parts, but how does it differ when you just think about, a partial listing edit and also, media management and things of that sort? And here, Mike, as a MLS vendor, we'll start with you and come back down the line the other way. So.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the amount of complexity goes up dramatically once you get beyond some of the basics, right? I mean, a lot of the listing is standard, and some of those things are pretty straightforward, but then, each MLS kind of has their own fields, even though we have standards and we're moving more and more aggressively on that. It's hard to look at an MLS system and not see some of those, and so I think the rules and the way that data gets entered becomes more complex, and so maybe it's harder to do on a phone in those cases. But I think, again, you're going to see a lot of innovation around that where agents won't be re-entering that data. That'll become from a standard record, and that will make it so much easier where they don't have to even bother entering a lot of that data. They'll just be dealing with the marketing information and the photos and things like that. So I definitely think the prime use case on a phone today is, price changes, things they want to do on the fly. Photos is a big one too, but sooner or later they're going to want to do everything on their phone. There's no doubt about that.
Right. I don't know, Alex, how does partial listing edit factor into Upstream's near-term plans? Do y'all see that as a big use case?
Oh, absolutely. And to Michael's point about the mobile, just for them to be able to do it in flight at any time is key. As far as a full record insert, I think again a lot of this is wanting to be able to stay within certain ecosystems and be able to take the information and submit it and create an entire record. I mean that use case is coming. I think fundamentally the brokers they want a choice. They want a choice of where they're doing the entry and where they're doing the management. Whether regardless of the system, if the MLS is a system of record, awesome. but the brokers want multiple ways of entering that data into the system.
Yeah, we've done full ad with creating an active listing with all the data, but we don't generally do that because it doesn't make sense in our workflow. So I'm an agent, I have my iPad, I've filled out the listing agreement, got it electronically signed, now I'm walking around the house marking off the attributes. Generally, I don't need to send a photo, and I'm not ready to make it active at that time, because we need to clean up the house, we need to stage the house. It's not going to go active that moment. And so we've found that it's better to do a project that's counted in weeks, that's partial, because today, almost every MLS, it's a one-off project. And why spend an extra 3 or 4 months to make it a full active listing? They push it into the MLS as incomplete or held, and then it can be made active when they're ready in the system without having to re-enter the data. And they can upload all the fields, but it'll still be held or inactive.
We think about it a little bit differently in that, so I'll take the example in Atlanta. We are actually going for a full 100% every field entered into the system. We figure out which fields need to go to FMLS, which fields are the same or which fields are different for Georgia MLS, but we're looking for the entire data set of the MLS being able to be entered, because I think when you get there, that's when you get the real efficiencies. I think there can still be inefficiencies if I do a partial entry here, and then I maybe use a different system to do an update. We're trying to get a single point of entry for all the fields that the MLS needs as well as the brokerage needs. And then I think another key differentiation is we're not pushing that to an intermediate database, we're actually pushing that directly into the MLS. So this is simply an alternate front end, it's not an alternate database. Right. But I agree with the other panelists here, when you think about mobile, I think it's a very different use case. When you're on a phone, you know, it's hard to really enter the data. So I think for mobile, the approach we're taking is there's some key fields you can change. You can change status, you can change price, and then you can work with photos. You can reorder photos. Because the phones have pretty nice cameras, you can take a photo. But I think that's where on mobile you're going to look at price status photos. But I do think you've got to get to the full listing input with full business rules validation if you're going to get the efficiencies that the brokerage community wants.
Well, and that kind of segues into I guess our next question here is that, I mean, trying to, you know, have external ad edit, you know, properly create and insert a record into the database is no small feat, but trying to have it go into, you know, multiple databases, you know, more or less simultaneously is going to obviously present a lot of other challenges. You know, what are the additional complexities, you know, that come with that, with trying to do multiple simultaneous insertion?
I mean, I'll start because we've been working on this for a couple of years now. One of the challenges is simply the subtle differences between fields. So you'll have a pick list in one MLS, a pick list in the other MLS, and they're slightly different. So one of the things we've done is we've created hints. So when you click on the option for the first pick list, we will give you a hint and suggest which option in the second pick list is probably the approximate equivalent in the two MLSs. But doing this mapping between the two MLSs is difficult. Now, that's with two. You try and do this with 3 or 4, the problem becomes exponentially more difficult. So that's a challenge. I think the other challenge is also around data validation. So the listing may clear in one MLS, or it may clear in the broker's back office system, but it doesn't clear in the other MLS. So having the ability to show if the listing has an error, where the error occurred, and what the error was, you can quickly go in and fix it. And even with the photos, one of the things that for us was surprising is we just assumed that when the agent or their assistant uploads the photos for a listing, they would want the same photo order for each MLS. And for reasons I still don't entirely understand myself, the agents have said, no, I'd actually like to have different photo order in different MLSs. So we revised the software so you could say, okay, for the first MLS, here's the photo order, here's the cover photo, and for the second MLS, here's a slightly different photo order. I think one of the reasons may be when MLSs have a different limit on the number of photos. Mm-hmm. But again, there's a lot of this nuance that when you look at the multi-MLS scenario that emerges that I don't think was, at least for us, was not obvious when we first tackled the project.
I don't know, Joe, have you guys tackled multiple?
Yeah, I'd say there's also more than one way to tackle the problem. You can certainly enter it once through a third-party system that sends it to multiple MLSs. But today we're working with, the Great Lakes repository, and if I'm a RealComp member and I enter it in through our system, through the upload process, goes in directly into the Matrix database, and then they share it to other MLSs. So that's another way they're accomplishing it. So.
I see. So that system, then you actually have a primary MLS that receives it first, and then from there they have a mechanism for then relaying the information
yes, and they
onto
can, an
other.
MI RealSource member would do the same thing using our system, and it would go to RealComp. So.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Well, Alex, I mean, clearly this is I guess sort of the core mission of Upstream. How are you guys, cracking the nut there?
So we're doing something sort of similar where if you're in 2, 3, 4 MLSs and there's potentially different field validation on how you describe a swimming pool or whatever, different drop downs, we do the same thing where once you're in it, it knows who you are, it knows what MLSs you're in, and it'll actually give you the multiple values, sort of like instead of just having a drop down, it will like almost drop a 4-way drop down and say, tell you which MLS to pick, and same thing, hinting, aligning, except, I mean, this will get, I'm really excited about what RESO is doing with the business rules and moving forward in that direction, because I think that sort of standardization will make this problem 10 times easier, right? And it's never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be 100%, because, I mean, I think where the rules are where it really kicks in to where real estate is local versus, the data dictionary, which is should be the same for pretty much everything, right? So I'm really excited about that work as that moves forward. I think one of the other issues, and Errol alluded to it, is when you're doing multiple inserts and if any of those MLSs are in data share agreements, there's just the business rules for what trumps what needs to be there, right? But that's probably at that point, it's not honestly that complicated. Other industries have been doing this all the time, right? We're just catching up.
Okay, well, it's comforting to know it's not that complicated. Yeah.
Tell
Mike,
our
bring us a
developers
vendor's perspective here. I mean, how does the multiple, entry complicate things?
Well, it's a really an exponential kind of problem, right? I mean, each MLS has their own rules and how the data should be formatted and validated as it's being entered. And once you just start adding more and more to that process, it becomes more and more complicated. And I agree with what Alex was saying regarding standards. And I would maybe go a step beyond that and say, we service 180 some MLSs, and I know our competitors also do. And the only way you truly solve this problem at scale, as opposed to going, one MLS and, maybe we can get that done in 6 months or 12 months or whatever it might be. If you do that, it'll be 50 years before the problem is solved. To do this truly at scale, we can't program a system for these guys and these guys and these guys, and they can't do that for 700 or 500 or 50 even MLSs. It has to be a standard, and we all have to get together and agree, and I think we've all been at the table with RESO to move that forward as quickly as possible. And I would just really say this about it. It'll move forward exactly as fast as we all agree it should move forward. The challenge sometimes is there are a lot of competitive differentiators sometimes that get in the way of true standards work, and I think we all need to be at the table, and MLSs out in the audience, you need to really support that standards effort to say it's got to be now, because RESO's been prepared and ready to work on this for some time, but there's been a lot of delay because the key parties had their own reasons for not necessarily stepping up to the table and doing that. And so as the person stuck in the middle of that, I don't get the luxury to pick which one of these guys I'm going to work with. I have to work with all of them. And so we absolutely just need a standard. It's the only way it's going to work.
Okay. Well, here, Mike, I mean, just sort of following up on the whole standards discussion, I mean, so much of the RESO standards work has been focusing on data dictionaries and standard field lists and IDX payloads and that sort of thing, but clearly we're going to need a more broadly scoped standards effort to take on business rules and be able to start standardizing around those. And again, yet the local MLS does need to be local and agile, and I really want to thank our long-suffering MLS vendor for adding a week and a half ago did it flood in Harvey, yes, no field, to our database when they swore that they were not going to make any more changes to our old legacy system, but they did manage to squeeze one more in there for us, and we're petitioning Jeremy to make that a RISO standard field as well. But no, I mean, how, just expand a little bit on those sole standards. I guess we'll just let you do the standards thing and come back down the line to Errol. So
yeah, I mean, I think I'll just echo again what Alex said. I mean, it is a complex problem, but it is solvable, and there are ways of doing it. And I think, again, we're blessed in this industry to have people who are cooperating together, and smart people. And I think we can truly solve this problem. We just need to really put the pedal to the metal and do it, because these technologies are available today, and there are ways of doing this in an automated fashion so that it doesn't require a human being to go to somewhere, to go to an MLS, learn their business rules, catalog them, and do all that. You can do it in an automated way so that the systems can learn from each other. And again, it's not, RISO's standard has had that for 10 years in a system that people hadn't really implemented until more recently. And so we could use the standard that Bridge's system is using. If we just have to all agree to use that one and not worry about building two, or if we're going to use the new one, use the new one and focus on that, and then really put that at the fore and not let it. I always hear this, oh, that's going to take years and years and years. Yep, it will if that's what everybody says it's going to happen. But if you say, nope, it's going to take months, it'll get done in months. It's just as simple as that. You have to just say you're going to do it and then sit down and do the work. But what happens with any kind of volunteer effort like this, any kind of cooperative effort, you go exactly as fast as all the parties want to go. And so I think it's really critical that we just commit and that all the MLSs in the room agree to that and really put us to it.
I think Alex is working on a tighter time frame than that. So how do standards, really expanding the standards role, factor into your implementation plans?
Well, it's huge, actually. I mean, because even though there's, hundreds, if not thousands of business rules almost per MLS, the reality is there are patterns. I mean, there are a lot of patterns that we've found already. And maybe the end value changes, but they're all kind of thinking around the same thing. So as we get some sort of standardized values, standardized business rules, that will help a lot. I think there will always be uniqueness because, again, a lot of the business rules are tied to the locality of real estate, right? But I think what will be really interesting to watch, and hopefully, and I know the rules group is sort of just getting knee deep into this thing, right? Is this, whether the architecture will support the complexity, right? Because it's not just here's your business rules and here's what you're allowed to put in, but then there's like what are all the second and third conditions that are required in order for you to be allowed to pick one or two of the other options, right? And that depth of the business rules is where we need to make sure that the architecture can support it.
Okay. Joe?
I agree with what the other panelists said, of course. We support standards. Just to add something different, just as a company, we've said we can't wait for them. Because I'm not going to call up you, Sam, and Bob Hale and say, well, I got to wait for the new RISO standard to get fully baked before we can do your project. No, we'll get it done in the next few weeks. And so, again, we support the standards, but we've got to keep moving in the meantime. So,
I think it's on all of us to just push hard and help the standard move forward, right, in any way we can.
Errol?
I would say, just for starters, hats off to NAR, who in 1999 set up the real estate transaction standard, or RETS as we know it today. And there's a lot of good work that's gone into that over the course of 15 plus years. It's the RETS update standard that we use today to create a functioning listing input system. And so our philosophy is whatever standard exists right now, we're going to use it. And then at the same time, we're going to do everything we can to support RISO to develop new and improved standards. And that's kind of the way the standards world works. There's an existing standard. It takes time for vendors to adopt it. you take advantage of it, and then you start working on the next generation. And when the next generation comes out, you transition to the new standard, you get it solid, and then you start working on the next version of the standard. There's sort of an evolution here in the standards. I think the one factor that it's important to think about when you think about standards, though, is getting the MLS vendors to implement and support those standards, and then who bears that cost. So oftentimes there will be a mandate saying, okay, we need to get everybody up to a certain standard, but then who should pay for that? I mean, I don't think that FBS should pay for it or CoreLogic should pay for it, but at the same time, you know, does this become a financial burden on the MLSs? So I think we also have to take the financial impact of the standards efforts into consideration as well. It's not just a matter of we technologists getting in a room and trying to create something that's technically elegant, but maybe has downstream business impact.
I think that's a really important point, but you know, of course, we want you to all pay us more money, but I think that's a really important issue. I would say more so right at this moment with this, because it is relatively new. There has been a standard around for a while, but because this topic wasn't hot like it has been over the last few years, because Upstream brought it to the fore, and then Zillow, of course, bought Bridge, and sort of reinvigorated that product line. Okay, now it's all of a sudden it's become important, but still, most MLSs have not implemented business rules and other things in that. So now there's a big investment that's going to be made in some process, some standard, some way of doing this. And once you have that investment made, that then becomes, you know, it takes on a life of its own. And you just look at what's happening with the RESO Web API and how much work it is to move people along. I mean, think how long it took us to get people off of FTP, for crying out loud. So if we take and make an investment now in the older 1.x standard, that investment is then going to have a life of its own for a long, long time. And so I don't think it's a luxury the industry can or needs to take to say, let's support two standards. We have an opportunity right now to do this right and do it well and do it quickly. But again, we've got to be committed to that, and we can't say we're going to promote this because we have it now. I mean, I get all that, and I certainly get Joe's point too. I mean, you got to move forward, and so we're sitting here in a position where it's like, yeah, okay, if RESO really is going to take a while, I don't know. I mean, if we can't get everybody to play nice, yep, it'll take a long time. Again, it'll take us exactly that. All right, then we'll have to come up with something on our own, do something one-off, and then try and get these guys to commit to that. I mean, it's all kind of nonsense. We just have to work together and just get this job done so that we can have the innovation that we all expect to see around this and other aspects of the MLS system. I mean, that stuff is happening, but in this particular case, that money hasn't yet been spent. It's about to be spent, and where it gets spent is up to you all to say, hey, we want it in a standard system, or we want a bunch of systems, and we want to support a bunch of systems over time. I think it's pretty obvious that you don't want to go that route. That's going to be more expensive, more timely, and make things drag on forever.
Tell you what, we'll let Errol have the last word then.
I'd say something, I hear what you're saying. I was actually going somewhere a little bit different, which is, you know, I don't know if Chris Bennett and Chip McAvoy are still here from CoreLogic and Black Knight. Their companies, they did the work, they currently support RETS Update. That's already sunk investment, and good on them. It's fantastic, so thank you. And that doesn't suggest that we should rest on our laurels and say, okay, we're done. We absolutely, all of us here on the stage and the other good people who are involved in RESO absolutely need to keep pushing as fast as we can for the new web APIs, the sort of the new technology that RESO is working on. I just want to make sure, though, that we as technologists think about the business implications as we're defining these specs to make sure we can make them easy for the MLS vendors to implement, reduce the burden of the expense for the end users, for the MLSs. So
if you want to reduce the burden on MLS, pick one. Well, pick a standard. That's
Well,
it.
tell you what, with that, we are up against a hard stop. And we're going to pick a standard, and either whether it's the one that we already have or the one that we're going to build. But Bob Goldberg's got a plane to catch, and that clock says we're out of time. So I'd like everybody to give a big round of applause to our panelists. And And this is a conversation that will be going on for a few more months yet, and I'm sure we'll have something to talk about it in Chicago as well. So thank you very much.